In this video on charting, we're going to work with creating a pie chart, and then we're going to do some advanced editing changes and formatting changes once you've created a chart. The data file we're going to use to begin with is called grain, once again in the Lesson 8 data files folder. And looks like this. The data that we are going to chart to create this spreadsheet is, rather than including the labels to begin with, because what we're going to create a pie chart. And when we think of a pie chart, we want to think about the fact that we only want to show the parts of the pie in relation to each other. We don't want to do each individual, in this case, grain, and the total, because if you think of that pie chart, the total would be 50% of the pie, and these chunks would take up the other half of the pie. So you wouldn't really be representing your pie chart the way you want it to be. If you turn in your book to page 193, you'll see a finished example of what we're going to create. And as you look at the different segments there, one of them is not total. Also, in the pie chart, if we would highlight the labels here, which would be a good thing to do if we were doing a column or a bar or a line graph, it wouldn't know what to put in that information because it's looking here and it's seeing all of the grains listed here as labels and then the number values. But we've got a title, a segment, and then where it should be number is the word sales or text. So it would be a little bit confused. So because we're creating a pie chart, we don't want to include the total or the sum of all of the individual parts, because once again that would be 50% of your pie and this would represent the other 50%. So to create this pie chart, we're only highlighting labels and the dollar values for the individual sections. We'll go to our Insert tab just like we did when we created the column chart, and we're going to create a pie. And you can see we have two different options here. We have two-dimensional pies. I know this one shows one of the chunks of the pie being pulled out. You can also manually do that, so I wouldn't necessarily choose this option because if you do it manually, you have control of pulling it out. For this example, we're going to choose a 3D type, or pie, excuse me. So we'll go ahead and create that. And if you look on page 193, you can see that we have to do a little bit of tweaking here because not everything in our pie chart looks like how we want this to look. The first thing that we're going to do is we are going to choose or open up more options for layout. We know that we're going to want to create a title, but as we look at the chart that we see on page 193, you can see we also want to include the label and the percent. I encourage you very much to always include percents when you create a pie chart because it helps your analytical viewer not only see the section but also see the exact percent. Because we want to have that title there, we're going to go ahead and change the layout to this title. You can see that it automatically puts the labels and the percent values with each of these. If it was important to you that the people also be able to see the number data, I would suggest choosing this layout 3 option, which would put the number data right below. That might put the legend below also, or maybe this percent with the legend. Just experiment with the different layouts till you get the one that you want. But this one right here gives the information. You'll notice as you look at the example on page 193 that the wheat 10% information couldn't fit in that pie example, and there's a little line separating it off. That just means this pie was moved to be a little bit smaller and it didn't have room. So don't worry right now that ours doesn't look like that. Let's go ahead and let's change our chart title to read Annual Sales by Segment. And you notice this time I just clicked right here. When I typed the title, it appeared in the entry bar here, but when I pressed my enter, it updated my title. The last thing it asks us to do is to move and resize this title to D1 to H15. And when we do that, I'm going to see if it wraps for us the way that the book shows. And it does. So once we make it smaller, you can see that it moved that data in order to fit. So the important things to remember when you create a pie chart are, don't include the sum of the totals, because that would be 50% of the pie right there. And don't include excess labels, just include the individual data plus the values that you're going to be representing through your pie chart. So that pie charts are pretty easy. The chart layouts help you control how they appear and are laid out. Now we're going to practice doing some sort of advanced modifying of our chart, of a chart, I should say. And to do this, we're going to open Coronado from the data files. And here that is. Now, for this example, we have been asked to select B6 through B16. This time we're not including totals and we're not including the labels in front of it. And then after we've selected B6 through B16, what you're going to do next is hold down your control key and select, oh, pardon me, let's start over again. I was to select B6 through B16 first, this column, and here is why. Look up here. Notice that we have a blank column. If I widen it, you can see it better. That is left there just to give a little space. If we would have highlighted as I originally did, it would allow space on our chart for this blank column that doesn't have any data in it. And in this case, that would be a bad thing. It would wreck the appearance of our chart. So remember, in Excel, you always are very careful to select the data that you definitely want to represent. Now, hold your with B6 through B16 highlighted, hold down your control key, and we're going to grab a separate section of the spreadsheet. You can see now both sections are shaded, but not this blank row that happened to be in here. The type of chart that we are going to practice this time is called a scatter chart. And so this is a new one, so we'll go to the scatter, and the option that we want is scatter only with markers. And if you mouse over, you see how I did that? It popped up there briefly and then it's going to go away. Well, I guess it stays up. Scatter only with markers. So we're going to do that particular one, and we'll go ahead and insert it, and I'm just going to pull it off to the side here a little bit. Okay, now we're missing some important pieces. You'll notice it doesn't know what to call the individual lines as they've been plotted. It doesn't know what to call the x-axis. It doesn't know what to call the y-axis. So we need to do a bunch of fixing now to make this work properly for the data that we're trying to represent. So with our chart selected now, and remember, when we moved our chart to its own sheet, the Chart Tools option automatically showed up for us. If I click outside of my chart and I want to go in and make changes to it, all of a sudden those chart tools go away. So whenever you want to make a change to a chart, you need to make sure that you have your chart selected and that your chart tools are showing here. We're going to go to the Layout tab. And we're going to begin by using these buttons that exist right here. Remember, before, when we were making changes, we went into design for the particular chart we had, and we chose one that had a layout that included titles and the X and Y axes and those kinds of things. But you can also control it individually. So if you wanted to add a chart title, in this case, you would choose where you want it to be, center over the title, center lay over, or above chart. We're going to choose the above chart one. Okay, and with it selected now, we can type the title. And I'm getting this information from page 194 in your book if you'd like to follow along. I happen to be on step 6 right now. This chart title is going to be Production and Scrap Report. So I type that in and I press enter. Or you could do as I did before and double click in there, and that would get your cursor where you could do it. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add some axis titles, and this allows us to add a definition for the X or horizontal and the Y or vertical. And so to add these titles, we want to choose them separately. We're going to start with primary horizontal, and we want it below the axis. And the title that we're going to add here is units produced. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back to axis. This time we're going to choose vertical, but we want to do the rotated because, as you see from the example, the rotated is going to put it up and down, which takes less space. So we're going to choose that one, and this is going to be units of scrap. Okay. Now notice that these titles match the labels that were available here. Had we highlighted those, the chart may have been a little happier, but we can enter it later as we're doing right now. We don't happen to need this legend for what we're trying to show, so you can go to legend and say none, or when the handlebars are on it, you can just press your delete key and get rid of it. Either way will get rid of that for you, and you'll see as soon as we get rid of the label or the legend, excuse me, which we didn't need, all of a sudden we have a bigger space for the data within our chart. We're going to move this chart to its own sheet, and rather than having it be an object in sheet 1, we're going to move it to a new sheet. And so we'll go ahead and move this, and it's going to be called chart 1. That's fine, or you could rename what you wanted it to be. For example, if I wanted to call this scatter chart, because perhaps I'm going to make a couple of different charts, I can go ahead and do that. Okay, so now this chart is on its own separate worksheet. Let's continue with our formatting. I am now on page 195, and the steps I'm going to show you here are very important for one of the assignments that you will be doing, or a couple of them actually, but you will need to do this option, so please practice with me. We're going to continue on now, page 195, and we're going to go to the Format tab. With formatting, a lot of times what you're doing is you're kind of modifying ways that you're seeing different kinds of data as you're working with it. Okay, so in this current selection section with the Format tab selected, we're going to go to open up a bunch of options to work with here, and we're going to say, all right, the first of all, what we want to change is the horizontal value axis. Okay, what that does is that's going to allow us to make some changes to that axis. Once we have it selected here, then we can go into Format Selection, and you're going to see there's an interesting dialog box that opens. This allows us, you'll notice the software automatically assumed that we'd want to group our values in groups of 2000, and because of our data, the minimum value is 4,000. So normally we always want to have our values start at 0, but in this case we want to change the minimum value that appears, and to make that change we click in the fixed button, and then we add the value that we want to change it to, in this case 4,000, because then that won't leave this empty white space on the left side of our chart. And we're happy with that, so we're going to go ahead and close it. And you can see now, if you were giving a presentation on this, you may say something to the effect of, notice that I started the x-axis or the horizontal axis at 4,000 in displaying this data. Now we're going to make some additional changes to the vertical axis. So this time we will select the vertical value axis, and once again we want to format it. And this time we're going to change, rather than it moving up in increments of 100, we're going to have it move it in increments for the maximum we're going to have change that to 250 there. Okay, so we want the biggest value, because in this case we see the biggest number is 250, and the fact that it went to 300 left some white space. So we're going to change the maximum value to an amount of 250. And when we close that, you can see then it's made our chart a little bit more spread out as we're working with it. Now, let's stop here, and we'll finish the rest of the charting information in the next video. We are almost